Almaty is the second city of Kazakhstan, and it's now become a bustling and modern metropolis. For most of the 20th century, though, vast swathes of Central Asia were hidden away from the world within the largely closed Soviet Union. When the USSR collapsed in the early 1990s, Kazakhstan became independent and saw meteoric economic growth, and now it's thriving. Thanks to rich natural resources and stunning scenery, the region is now being noticed. And not just by businesses and tourists. Historians too are starting to take a very special interest. For many years, it was widely believed that this land of vast plains and towering mountains had been nothing more than a trading route along which ancient peoples passed as they traveled the Great Silk Road between East and West. But on the outskirts of a town called Issyk, not far from Almaty, an unexpected archaeological discovery in 1970 turned conventional history on its head.
It was a most extraordinary find on the territory of Kazakhstan when it was still part of the Soviet Union.
It was extraordinary because even though there are many ancient burial mounds called kurgans all over Central Asia, most had been stripped bare by grave robbers centuries ago.
The Golden Man was found in 1970. He was called the Golden Man because of the amount of jewelry that was found with him. The grave was completely undisturbed and hadn't been robbed, which for Kazakh archaeology and for world archaeology became quite a sensation.
I think the Golden Man is important because, of course, there have been other finds in the steppe region, but the unexpectedness of finding this really superb figure clad, it would seem, from the way the gold plaques were laid out, clad in this suit of gold. It gives us an insight into the level of sophistication of that period. And one has to remember that pretty well nowhere else in the world was there that level of sophistication at that time, if one compares it, for example, with Europe. This is just light years ahead. So it does throw light on a period that really is dark, not because nothing was happening, but because we simply don't know enough about it, and we're only gradually uncovering little bits here and there.
This particular and unique burial chamber had been saved from grave robbers by its unusual placement within the mound.
Usually, people were buried in the center of Saka kurgans. The Golden Man remained intact precisely because he was buried to the side of the mound. Robbers had plundered the central chamber several times, while the Golden Man remained on the sidelines. Since the Golden Man discovery, the robbers haven't only been digging in the middle of the burial mounds, but around them as well.
When Kazakhstan became independent, there was a real need for history, but history that you could touch, you could interpret.
The Golden Man has become an important part of these children's history, their heritage, and future.
Once upon a time, in the Saka tribes, the main hat of the Saka tribe had 9 sons, and the youngest was Altin Aydar. Our Golden Man, when he was born, he had a golden strand of hair.
School trips to Independence Square and the monument dedicated to him in the city centre are always something to look forward to.
So immediately after independence, people wanted something to establish their identity. And what could be better than this extraordinary archaeological discovery that had glamour, it had beauty, it indicated a warlike, independent spirit. All of those things were perfect for a new nation.
This is a site that was investigated in 1999. It's a kurgan. Here, as you can see, a grave pit has been reconstructed. Basically, it was a kurgan very much like this, quite a similar construction that the Golden Man was buried. But this one is a much smaller burial mound. I should say that the bones were all that remained of the Golden Man in his grave. His clothing wasn't at all preserved.
This is a much more recent discovery, but it does date from the same period as the Golden Man, and though her burial wasn't as richly adorned as his, she gives us a pretty good idea of how the Golden Man appeared to the archaeologists who first found him. Krim Altenberkov specializes in archaeological preservation and restoration.
It's difficult to discuss her similarities with him because she had a completely different status to the Golden Man. If he was of royal origin, she was completely different. We believe she was a priestess, or perhaps a healer, but we're not sure yet. This is one of the rarest moments when an exhibit reaches us untouched. The skeleton was removed in a large block, extracted along with the earth surrounding it. Not a single item was lost. Each little piece, everything has remained in place. That's why she's so important. She's providing a lot of new information about the era of the Golden Man. This is the first time we've seen anything like this. A unique historic monument, the costume, the lifestyle. She's revealing many discoveries and posing some big questions. It's fascinating.
We are in the vault here at the Issyk Reserve Museum, and here in front of me are the real bone remains, or post-cranial skeleton of the Golden Man. The actual bones are right here now in the Issyk Museum Reserve Vault. In the future, if we can raise the funds for it, we plan to rebury his remains within the museum grounds. We want it to become a pilgrimage destination, and not just for domestic tourists, but I think foreign visitors will be interested too. Because of the fact that the burial hadn't been plundered, every one of the plaques was still in place. They could even smell the coat he wore. That's why it was possible to reconstruct his outfit with 95% authenticity. Broadly speaking, before this sensational discovery, scientists hardly knew anything about Saka-Scythian culture, and this discovery provided answers to many questions about the Scythian Sakas.
And they're particularly important questions for Berik Abdigalyuli from the scientific research organization Sacral Kazakhstan.
The Golden Man is, for us, a virtual symbol of the victory of Tamiris over the Persian ruler Kir. The whole history of the Scythians, which we've come to know through their legends and their writings. We will never know for sure who he was, this Golden Man, because we don't have any written sources. But for us, he is a symbol, the symbol of a period that we're proud of. It's a part of our history. That's why we're proud of it. We are also the descendants of the Scythians, the Saka-Scythians. That means he's also our blood, ancestor.
It's clear that the Scythians, or Sakas as they're known in Kazakhstan, played a significant role in ancient times. But who were they?
The people of the steppes, the earliest inhabitants of the steppe in the Western world, are normally known as Scythians. The Chinese have a different word, but the concept is the same. These are people of the grasslands, barbarians, the unknown people. The settled peoples all around came into contact with them, but they didn't differentiate. Were these separate tribes? Were they separate peoples, nations? They are known collectively in the Western world as Scythians. I think when we look at the Golden Warrior, we see two things. First of all, an extraordinarily high degree of technological skill. The sophistication of the gold decoration is extraordinary. So is the artistic imagination. But linked to that is the fact that we perceive, though we can't understand, that there was a whole symbolic, ideological, religious background to this, a context. So these weren't individual little specks of this or that. They added up to a conceptual whole. We haven't got the key, but it existed, and it's quite clear that there is a link somewhere, and perhaps one day we will find more archaeological remains that will give us a clue as to what that story was.
We could talk for a very long time about every detail of the Golden Man's clothing, because each one is an expression, a symbol of some kind, a meaning. So together they reveal the Saka's worldview at that time. The Iron Age Saka art is what we call the animal style.
Before the Golden Man's discovery, historians had always believed that the Scythians of Central Asia were merely simple nomads.
Trophies from the early Iron Age that have been found in Saka kurgans prove that they were actively engaged in hunting, cattle breeding, and farming.
Study of burial mounds has shown that, as a rule, before burial, in this case it appears to be a royal burial, material for the interment, just as they did with the pyramids of Egypt, was prepared over several years.
Archaeologically speaking, excavation of this kurgan back in 1969 provoked significant resonance around the world because it was the first Saka monument that had not been robbed. It gave us the opportunity to see their extensive wealth and the luxury that attended them. Most importantly, it was a chance to see an ancient Saka person's clothes in their original state. It has allowed the complete reconstruction of his funeral suit. And that has told us a great deal about their ideology, their art, their way of life, and many other questions that until then were unresolved. However, the complete value of the discovery still isn't fully understood.
If we focus on the Saka religion during the early Iron Age, of course, before Islam they worshipped nature. We can even say that in particular they worshipped the sun, because the image of the sun god Mitra was engraved on the Golden Man's ring. Also, on his headdress, we can find and interpret symbols that indicate worship of the sky, the mountains, and various animals.
The suit is only a funeral costume. It's quite possible that this young man, or prince, never wore such an outfit in his lifetime. It's thought to be a ceremonial burial dress, and that magnificent clothing of its kind would only be made for a ceremony of transition from this world to the next, to the afterlife.
To talk about the economy of the early Iron Age, we need to look at the techniques they used to make the jewellery on the Golden Man's outfit. It suggests that, in the era when the Golden Man lived, the people of that time were civilised and culturally developed.
He was a young man of about 18, wearing a ceremonial funeral suit. There was a total of around 4,000 items of jewellery decorating the costume. Most people like to focus on the allure of gold and the quantity of the golden details, but I prefer to pay attention to another artefact, There was also a silver bowl found with him. It had an inscription, and I consider that to be the main find, the most important object that accompanied this rich, royal young man, or prince, on his journey into the next world.
The bowl has an inscription consisting of 26 characters. This suggests that writing in the Golden Man's times was at a highly advanced level. And also, the Golden Man was not just a warrior. We consider him as a prince because the burial was not so simple. The burial of 4,000 elements indicates that he was a man of high status.
By the way, it's worth mentioning that there are lots of golden men, about 5 to 7 in all. They reveal a lot about our ancestors' cultural achievements, so attitudes to them are rather special. It meant there was a surge in culture during the Saka era, which is always interesting. It provides boundless and rich food for thought.
The 4 arrows on his headdress show us that he was the ruler of the 4 directions of the world. This embodies the 4 sides of the world. The plaques on the tunic are made using a base of bronze that was covered with gold foil. Leaf gold is a sign that he was an heir to the throne. Archaeologists often find pure gold on plaques in royal burials.
Decades of painstaking work has been devoted to creating an accurate replica of the Golden Man's suit. Krim Altenbekov explains the process.
Here you can see fragments of a saddle that are not in the best condition. We assembled the shape from the small pieces that were brought to us. In fact, we already know the shape. You see? That's why we could proceed with what we had been given. Traditional saddles at that time had quite a unique form, and this is the end result. The reconstruction that we made, that's how it used to look. The design's very important. And so, by collecting many small pieces, we can open up a new history, as it appeared at the time. This is one of the oldest styles of saddle in Kazakhstan.
Alina Altenbekova works with her father, Krim, to present their finished exhibits in museums. She explains what motivates them.
You know, it's like we can witness the lives like we're detectives, but detectives see how people die. We see how people lived that time. It's very interesting to see their culture, their weapon, their clothes, what they wear, what they used to believe in, what they used to draw, to make pictures of what. And it's very interesting. It's like, you know, such samples of their culture. That's why it's so important. And when we conserve it, when we restore the things, and we can show the samples of the culture, samples of the history. It's the history itself, the history that you can touch, you can see, you can smell, and etc.
The Golden Man is a material piece of evidence that talks of the history and culture of the Great Steppe. I guess we really are nomads, and he left a bright trail for us to follow regarding the culture of the Great Steppe.
Of course, our project is less scientific and more, well, it's clearly not religious, it's cultural, a socio-cultural project. By the term sacral, we don't necessarily mean holy or divine. Sacral refers to any objects that play a significant role in the lives of the people and the state. It might not be clear to some, but we can't know his real name, where he lived, who he was. We probably never will. But we're really talking about ourselves as descendants of the Scythians, the Saka.
There is a wonderful exhibition on in London now of Scythian art. Walking around it, I was simply stunned by the amazing beauty. And I marveled at their sensitivity, their ingenuity, and their intellectual grip of the world that they were dealing with. You see animals with an abstraction in art form that Picasso would have been proud of, and that is what I admire, that ability to communicate, even though we don't understand the message fully, but they are communicating to us, and that, I think, is an extraordinary talent, skill, gift. And I wonder if our world, our generation today, will have the creative imagination, the power, the intellectual power to communicate to future generations. We don't know their world, we don't know what their hopes and fears will be, but to communicate across the centuries something that they will be able to understand in the same way that these people from the steppes are still able to talk to us today. And even though we still haven't learned their language, but they are communicating.
The Golden Man was not just a warrior. We think of him as a prince because his burial wasn't at all simple. The 4,000 burial elements with him indicate that he was a man of high status.
It means for us that that time they had something like government, and they had quite a lot of people who were under that aristocracy. And this is very important for our history. And nowadays, when we are independent, we can be sure that this is not for the first time.
The Golden Man is a symbol of the Saka, Scythian period. That's why we are proud of it, that we are their descendants.
The more that's learned about the Golden Man and the era in which he lived, the more new legends are born about that time. Each new discovery provides some answers, but poses ever more questions about this little-known but important period of human development. We can be sure, though, that there is a great deal more history to be discovered, and for the future children of Kazakhstan to learn.
I don't think it's important which legend you choose to believe, but we can choose to preserve the monuments that provoke legends. That's why they are valuable.